They set the example and showed us it is possible for us St. Lucians work to be deserving of the highest recognition. A great creator, lover of the arts. Our rich history and our folklore, our people and our culture inspire the works of this accomplished author. Oh yes, we come from smallness, yet still we achieve greatness. Just to look at Sir Arthur Lewis, just to look at Honorable Walcott. Oh yes, they set the example and showed us that it's possible for us St. Lucians work to be deserving of the highest.
Again, a pleasant good evening to all. It is my esteemed pleasure to announce the arrival of His Excellency, Sir Cyril Errol Charles, Governor General of St. Lucia. Please stand. Please remain standing for prayer.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together this evening to honor the legacy of our Nobel laureate, Sir William Arthur Lewis. We pray for our nation, St. Lucia. Bless our leaders, our people, and our land with unity, peace, and prosperity. We lift up the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, its students, staff, and faculty, and ask you to guide this institution as it shapes future leaders. Bless the Nobel Laureate Committee for their dedication and all gathered here tonight. Open our hearts and minds to learn and share from this lecture, and may we leave inspired to love and uplift one another. In your holy name we pray, amen.
Amen. Please be seated.
Ms. Stanton Dewey is an economist at the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development, and Youth Economy.
Why, thank you for that introduction. Thank you so much, guys. And that prayer for, without God, our Lord and Savior, none of this would have been possible. A pleasant good evening again to everyone. I am Stanza Deligny, and it is my esteemed honor to serve as your mistress, your master of ceremonies tonight. Mistress of ceremonies tonight. Welcome to the Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture, one of the signature events of St. Lucia's 2025 Nobel Laureate Festival. This lecture honors the extraordinary legacy of Sir William Arthur Lewis, a true visionary whose groundbreaking contributions to economic thought and unwavering advocacy for education have inspired progress and prosperity both here in St. Lucia and across the globe. Before we proceed with this highly anticipated event, allow me to take a moment to acknowledge the presence of some esteemed individuals in the room. Again, His Excellency, Sir Cyril Errol Charles, Governor General of St. Lucia, Her Excellency Dame Paulette Louisi, Governor General Emerita and Chairperson of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee, Honorable Sean Edward, Minister for Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology, and Vocational Training, Dr. Didicus Jules, Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Mr. Cletus Springer, Chairman of the Board of Governors, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, and board members, Dr. Clarence Henry, Acting Head at the Regional Integration Unit, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, our feature speaker, Dr. Marjorie Jameson Charles, Principal, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, members of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee, members of the Kiwanis Club, other specially invited guests, members of the media, online viewers, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you again fair good morning. Good evening. Oh my. Your presence here this evening as we delve into our pivotal topic, economic prosperity in the new age, underscores the enduring the relevance of Sir Arthur's work in our country today. His groundbreaking work, his transformative ideas in development economics continue to serve as a guiding light, inspiring discussions and efforts towards fostering equitable and sustainable socio-economic growth worldwide. Now, it is my pleasure to invite to the podium Mr. Cletus Springer, Chairman of the Board of Governors for the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, to deliver the official welcome remarks. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. Springer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deligny. Governor General, with your permission, I will use the protocol that has already been established. I want to thank you for joining us tonight, sir. So good night to you all. In the interest of time, as I said, I use the protocols already established. However, I feel impelled to recognize in the audience my dear wife. I don't get to do that quite often, you know. So I want to do that. And I also want to recognize your presence, the Honorable President of the Senate, the Honorable Avina Reynolds. Thank you for joining us very much tonight. Permit me to salute the outstanding leadership of Dame Calliope Louisi, our Governor General Emerita, for her leadership of the Nobel Laureate Committee since its inception. I should also acknowledge the sustained hard work of all members of the Nobel Laureate Committee. And I applaud as well the contribution of the team from the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, led by our principal, Dr. Charles, and driven, and I emphasize that, driven by Mrs. Tracy Pilgrim George, who delights in making the college look good. Now, before I go any further, and I promise you I'll be very brief, I want to ask a favor of you. Last Friday, the SALCC community commemorated the first anniversary of the passing of Sir Leighton Thomas. In representing the Thomas family at this event was Sir Leighton's niece, Mrs. Dawn Odete. On that same day, and possibly at that same time that she was speaking at the event, her son, Sam, was only 21, collapsed and died while playing basketball in England. Now, most of us would not have met Sam, but most of us knew Sir Leighton, and we knew that he was a quintessential family man. And so I wish to ask you to pause with me for a moment's silence in Sam's honor. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Just a testament of the vicissitudes of life. You know, I still haven't been able to get over this, but hopefully I will. So thanks again for coming, all of you. And I want to say that 2 nights ago we had a packed crowd here, and tonight we have a packed crowd. And I think that bodes well for the future of these lectures. I myself have witnessed an increase in public involvement in the activities this year, and more especially since COVID. Of course, there's considerable room for improvement, but I think we would all like to see stronger participation from our students, and I dare say from our government ministers and senior public servants. And having said that, let me quickly acknowledge the presence of our Minister of Education, Mr. Sean Edward. Now, many of you know that he lives in the Valley, and so his presence here is especially appreciated. On behalf of the Board of Governors, faculty, staff, and students of the SALCC, the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, and the Nobel Laureate Committee, I extend a warm SALCC welcome to our neighbor at the OECS Commission, Dr. Clarence Henry, who is our featured speaker tonight. And like all of us, I eagerly anticipate his presentation, which I understand will, among other things, treat with the issue of happiness. Happiness as a concept in human development. Ever since the King of Bhutan conceived his happiness index about a decade ago, about 12 years ago, I have been given much thought to its suitability as an instrument of public policy that can help to guide our people, help our people to become happier people. It's an elusive concept, I admit, but I feel that the key features included in his index, such as psychological well-being, sense of community, social support, trust in government, perceptions of corruption and competency, and so on, are worth exploring. Is there a role, I ask, for spiritual well-being in promoting emotional balance? To quote the biblical question, what doth it profit a man or woman if they should gain the whole world and suffer the loss of their own souls? Welcome again, everybody. Welcome, Dr. Henry. Looking forward to your speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Springer. It really does hit home. Yes, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? In addition, of course, I'm sure we all are very excited to hear the connection between Sir Arthur Lewis's work, happiness, and economics here today. So for sure, we are looking forward to that. And as Sir Arthur Lewis rightly stated, and I quote, the substance level, the subsistence level is only a conventional idea, and conventions change. Sir Arthur Lewis, with that in mind, this evening we are privileged to host an enlightening keynote address by Dr. Clarence Henry, a distinguished development economist and my beloved former lecturer, on the topic, economic prosperity in the new age. What are the prescriptions for growth and development for small island developing states, some global lessons. This timely and thought-provoking presentation will allow Dr. Henry to share his insights on fostering growth and resilience in small island developing states, drawing on global lessons and addressing contemporary economic challenges. It will also offer valuable perspectives as we explore the pathways to sustainable development and prosperity, building on Sir Arthur Lewis's work in industrialization, economic diversification, and socio-economic development in developing economies. I will now invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Clarence Henry, to be officially introduced.
Dr. Clarence Henry is a St. Lucian
holder
of a diploma in teaching, a Bachelor of Science degree in economics and government
economist.
Master of Science, and
He is a
Doctor
holder of a
Philosophy
diploma in
degrees
teaching,
economic
a Bachelor of Science degree in economics and government, Master of Science, and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in economic development from the University of the West Indies. Currently, Dr. Henry serves in the service of the Commission of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States in the capacity of acting head of the Regional Integration Unit and as a Regional Integration Specialist. His current portfolio at the OECS Commission focuses on the advancement of initiatives to strengthen the free movement of persons regime within the Eastern Caribbean Economic Union. Previously, Dr. Henry served as a lecturer of economics at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College and is a former head of the Social Science Department. His teaching portfolio also includes the teaching of UE courses at the St. Augustine and Global campuses. Dr. Henry's research interests include economic development, growth, and economic integration among small states. Dr. Henry has published work with a focus on economic integration among CARICOM and OECS small
Privileged
states.
to invite to the podium our keynote speaker, development economist, Dr. Clarence Henry. Please join me again in offering him a warm and spirited welcome.
Thank you, Mistress Ceremony, Stanza. His Excellency Sir Cyril Errol Charles, Governor General of St. Lucia, Her Excellency Dame Paulette Louise, Governor General Emerita and Chairperson of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee, Honorable Alvina Reynolds, President of the Senate, Honorable Sean Edward, Minister for Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology, and Vocational Training, Dr. Didikus Jules, Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Mr. Cletus Springer, Chairperson, Chairman of the Board of Governors, Arthur Lewis Community College, and other board members, Dr. Marjorie Jameson Charles, Principal of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, management, staff, and students of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, members of the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee, members of the Kiwani Club of Castries, other specially invited guests, members of the media, online viewers, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Took me a while to get there. Before I delve into tonight's lecture, I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College and the Nobel Laureate Festival Committee for extending this invitation to present the 2025 Memorial Lecture in celebration of our most distinguished son of the soil, Sir William Arthur Lewis. Sir William Arthur Lewis, as you may know, won the Alfred Nobel Memorial Prize for Economic Science in 1979. And I'm not sure if it was by design because this was the same year of the independence of St. Lucia. And he has made a fundamental contribution in development economics, both as an academic and in public service. In fact, the Nobel Prize was granted in recognition of his pioneering work, which advanced discussions on the structural transformation of underdeveloped states. And I think these basic facts about the man whom we have celebrated over the decades and in whose honor we gather here this evening should be well known among all St. Lucians and Caribbean citizens. I encourage all aspiring economics and social scientists to pursue a course in development economics and to read the writings of Lewis and others in an effort to best contextualize the development problematic of developing states, like those of our region. And many times you have a lot of economists who are not trained from our region, who may never have done and pursued a course in development economics and really do not understand the issues around development. And they are supposed to be providing policy advice. So I shall say more about Lewis's contribution to development economics elsewhere in this lecture. So ladies and gentlemen, this evening's lecture is entitled Economic Prosperity in the New Age. What are the prescriptions for growth and development for seeds? Some global lessons. So I seek first to locate the idea that economic prosperity can be correlated with human happiness. The quest for human happiness is really an ancient phenomenon. And surely there has been a plethora of perspectives on this matter with respect to what a prosperous and hence a happy society may look like. And no doubt, the discussion on what leads to economic prosperity and happiness is also multifaceted. And nonetheless, in this lecture, it is assumed here that happiness is achieved within the context of stable economic and political environments among developed and developing economies alike. So I started this lecture this evening intentionally with the notion of happiness. Because at its core, economics is a science that focuses primarily on how to deliver happiness to individuals through the optimal use of resources that we are deemed scarce. Happiness can be viewed as a state characterized by feelings of contentment and satisfaction with one's life or current situation. In fact, development economies generally explore issues around happiness, although you may not actually see the reference to the term happiness in their writings. In fact, if we start with Lewis purported that good economics begins with a concern for the conditions under which people live. Amartya Sen, another Nobel laureate in economic science and a development economist, also explored how economic policy can be executed to deliver happiness. In his publication, Development as Freedom, Sen placed the focus on how economic policy can allow for the expansion of freedoms that people enjoy through the enhancement of their capabilities. And so for Sen, enhancing capabilities will lead to increased choices for people and hence greater prospects for economic prosperity. For these development economies, good economics will lead to the expansion of resources available to enhance capabilities manifested in economic, social, and political dimensions. And the following questions are therefore instructive. And development economies then seek to find appropriate answers to them. So what are those questions? Are there available good paying jobs? How accessible are social services, including education, healthcare, and social support? Is the air clean? Are societies free from crime? And are societies accepting of diversity? The answers to these and other related questions will provide invaluable insights on economic development and the state of happiness of a given population. So we've been saying happiness, but what really is happiness? How do you measure it? Can it be measured? Over the years, the World Happiness Report, which is produced annually, provides a measure of happiness based on the happiness index. The index is derived from data from a Gallup survey, which examines 6 categories, including GDP per capita income, social support, life expectancy, freedom to make choices, generosity of the general population, and perception of internal and external corruption. Accordingly, and don't bother with the bars. So we do rank first Finland all the way down, left to right. So accordingly, the 2024 report ranks Finland as the happiest nation on the planet with an index score of 7.74 out of 10, followed by Denmark and Iceland with index scores of 7.58 and 7.53 respectively. This report also highlights Afghanistan as the least happy with an index score of 1.72. In Latin America, Costa Rica was ranked the happiest with an index score of 6.98. In sub-Saharan Africa, Mauritius topped the ranking with an index score of 5.82, while Sierra Leone was the lowest rank with an index score of 3.25. Within our region, the CARICOM region, Jamaica was the only country assessed with an index score of 5.84 and a global ranking of 67 out of 145 countries. Among small island developing states, Singapore was the highest rank with an index score of 6.52 and a global ranking of 30. While our region has not been featured generally in this and previous reports, the question for us is not so much the quality of the index, but more the lessons to be drawn from these rankings. Intuitively, we should desire to understand what makes some populations happier than others. I vehemently share this view that what the average human being seeks to achieve is happiness. And everyone defines their own happiness. We work towards generating income that we will use to immediately consume goods and services, to buy clothing, food, entertainment, spend some money on Amazon, Shein, electronics. I know because I have so many Shein bags. I hope my wife is not following. You know, there's so many, but they come useful though. Or save for future consumption and investments such as purchase of land, housing, stocks, etc. Our consumption, as argued by utilitarian economists such as Alfred Marshall, reflects the utility or satisfaction that we believe we will derive from such consumption. So when you see somebody passing with a big ride, and you say, well, why is the person? That might be what makes the person happy. So think about it. We generally seek to consume goods and services that will bring us satisfaction, and such satisfaction ultimately should bring us a degree of happiness. However, for us to consume that which brings us satisfaction and happiness, we must produce. And for us to produce, we must have the capacity to do so. Lewis once argued that capacity to produce can be derived from anything and anywhere. We speak of access to natural and man-made resources, technology, human capital, a location of a port. You'd be so surprised how significant location is in the whole discussion on economic growth. And other factors that growth theorists have examined over the years to explain why economies grow or fail to grow. It is also important to note here that after producing the goods and services that we desire to consume, that we must have an effective system for sharing these national outputs, or what we know best as the gross domestic product, which is really just the value of everything we produce for the year added up, and it gives you your gross domestic product among the population. Moreover, in the contemporary era, we must also ensure that there is stability in production and consumption, so that we do not rob the future generations of their prosperity, and I dare say, their happiness. So in this lecture, I seek to unpack, if you like, the key economic policy issues that are essential for delivering and sustaining happiness among a given population, using seeds as the context and drawing from the experiences of countries with high happiness index scores. From my earlier argument, achieving strong and sustainable economic growth remains fundamentally what is required for delivering happiness among a given population. I'll say that again. Achieving strong and sustainable economic growth remains the fundamental requirement for delivering happiness. That's important. And we can debate this. Consequently, economic policy measures that aims for higher economic growth are of paramount value. Think of it. Without growth, good paying jobs cannot be delivered. Without growth, poverty cannot be eradicated. Housing cannot be improved. And ultimately, there will be little happiness. Lewis identified in his writings the importance of the following prescriptions for economic growth and development. Lewis spoke about the importance of industrialization and economic diversification, the importance of economic integration, economic empowerment, higher education, and of course, strategic government intervention. Nearly 70 years since Lewis's thesis on the industrialization of the British West Indies, many of the proposals for driving economic growth and promoting development remain aligned with his perspectives. Hence, Lewis's prescriptions remain relevant in the contemporary period. So this whole idea of strong and sustainable growth, let me take some time to contextualize this. So achieving strong and sustainable economic growth remains the fundamental economic policy goal for delivering economic prosperity and happiness. And I'm sure you've heard me say that maybe about 3 or 4 times. In fact, the top 10 happiest countries based on the happiness index grew at 2.68% between 1974 and 2023, compared with 3.42% in the case of the least happy countries, a difference of 0.72%. Now don't bother with the difference though. Given that mainly developed economies are featured among the top 10 happiest countries, while mostly developing economies are featured among the least happy countries, this growth difference is insignificant for achieving economic growth and development convergence. And just think of a relay. You're running the last and the fourth leg, and you're way behind the first, second, or third person. You would need to run at a faster rate in that last leg to catch up and possibly win the race for your team. And that is what developing economies are trying to do, catch up with developed economies. But to catch up with developed economies, you cannot be growing at the same rate that developed economies are growing. You must grow at a much faster rate. And the experience of Singapore really demonstrates this. Moreover, no nation, and again I say this, can prosper without achieving strong and sustainable economic growth. Now, here's the thing. We can always entertain a discourse on whether faster economic growth leads to sustainable development and prosperity for a given population. As we have noticed over the decades, the phenomenon of growth without development, and that is very possible. And we can also debate what is a strong growth rate. In the context of the Caribbean, generally, governments are recommended, or it's recommended to government, that a growth rate of 5% or higher is necessary to address those development needs. Low growth and poor development outcomes, such as rising unemployment, was the core problem that occupied Lewis's attention, and which influenced his proposal for a progressive agenda for the industrialization of what was called then the British West Indies. Again, the point here is that achieving strong economic growth is our starting point to delivering prosperity and happiness. That's our starting point. It is also important, nonetheless, to appreciate that in delivering strong and sustainable economic growth, that it is important to design and implement strategic economic policy. For growth does not occur without good policy, as Lewis alluded to. Among states such as those of the Caribbean region, this economic policy goal is a serious challenge, no doubt. And it's challenged by a plethora of growth constraints. And so, I think I'm going to get assistance from now on. It's not clicking, not moving forward. Small size. Everybody know we're small economies, small societies. So to begin with, we are small. And some writers actually say we're microstates. Think of it. The population of the 15-member countries CARICOM, for instance, is approximately 14 million people. With Haiti. Remove Haiti, and it's about 7 million people. You know, the latter size is smaller than the population of New York City, which has approximately 8.6 million people. Now come to us. The population of St. Lucia is 180,000 people. It is smaller than the parish of St. Catherine in Jamaica. Understanding this dynamic is of critical importance, as small size means fewer natural resources and limited human capacity. And of course, by extension, limited influence in the international community to promote development causes in our interests. Trade openness and limited capacity to compete in international markets. Small states have continued to struggle to compete in foreign markets with larger trading partners. In fact, it has been argued that economic globalization, which was meant to raise development boats, was in fact the impetus that has led to the shrinking of many development prospects. In the OECS, we have seen industries wither away. We've seen industries wither away because of the globalization phenomena. Think of it. Light goods manufacturing. Those of us who remember Bell Fashion in Dennery. Our banana industry. These were all victims of globalization and trade liberalization in the late 1990s. What about climate change? Climate change has been viewed as a significant threat to sustainable livelihoods and economic growth and development. And many times our reference to climate change is in terms of the frequency and intensity of major storms. So, if I were to refer to the 2017 hurricane season, which brought us Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria, what is noted here, based on the MDAT data, that during the 2017 hurricane season, there were approximately 367 natural disasters worldwide, which resulted in economic losses of US $326 billion. This actually represents 240% times greater than the average annual economic losses for an annual average of 354 natural disasters, which were observed not in 1 year, between 2007 and 2016. So imagine if we were to have another active 2017 hurricane season. The economic assessments of the impact of major storms for seeds suggest that climate change poses significant threat to life and livelihoods, and that it poses a threat to the attainment of strong and sustainable economic growth and development. And let's not forget the other side of the discussion as it relates to how it unravels the lives and livelihoods of regular people in our towns, in our villages, city communities as well. Ultimately, these constraints that I have highlighted here and others have made delivering strong and sustainable economic growth among seeds challenging and for the most part elusive. Hence, understanding the economic growth and development context faced by seeds is necessary to appreciate the economic policy prescriptions for building resilience, and that will result in positive development outcomes. So let me contextualize the economic growth reality of Caribbean seeds, which include our country and other countries within the region. Data highlights that economic growth and per capita income growth have slowed. Don't worry with this confusion I have here. I'm going to come to the slide at the bottom, the graph at the bottom. So data shows that economic growth and per capita income growth has slowed down in the Caribbean seas. From average 3% and 2.2% between 1974 and 1995 to 2.54% and 1.76% between 1996 and 2023, respectively. And of course, in the latter years, we had COVID somewhere in there. This outcome is even more pronounced for OECS seeds. And remember, I spoke about the impact of globalization and the loss of the banana industry. It's very impactful for many OECS seeds. So OECS seeds experienced sharper declines from 4.52% and 4.09% to 2.3% and 1.84% respectively for the same period, representing significant declines in economic growth and, of course, standard of living. It must be noted, however, that following economic reforms in the 1980s through to the 1990s, economic growth outcomes for commodity-based CARICOM states, so these would be Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, Guyana, Suriname, have slightly improved from 1.96% and 0.78% to 2.72% and 1.7%, respectively, for the period under review. This suggests, in fact, that the more recent declines in economic growth among Caribbean seeds have been driven more significantly by declines among service-based economies. Nonetheless, when compared with other regions and seeds with impressive industrial base such as Singapore, the divergence in growth and per capita income growth is noteworthy. So if you look at the graph below, the red line is Singapore. We're moving from right to left. The red line is Singapore. St. Lucia is the blue line somewhere at the bottom. The green line is, I'm just trying to go through the graph so that you appreciate the graph. But what is of importance is the divergence, where Singapore was, where Singapore is today, and where all the rest of the seeds are. That's significant. So let us explore Luis's perspectives on economic growth and development, which I believe remains central to our efforts at delivering strong and sustainable economic growth. So in the context of the Caribbean region's growth and development experience, the colonial and post-independence eras have proven to be very challenging, and I've highlighted that. Taking into account the globalization impact of the late 1990s, for instance, and the climate change impact in the more contemporary period, and the fact that we've experienced a global financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and then not so long after, in 2020, we experienced COVID. So colonial and post-independence eras have not been nice to us. In the colonial era, economic growth and development was really left wanting. No doubt, the labor unrest in the mid to late 1930s highlighted the Caribbean people's discontent with the state of development at the time. With this context in mind, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Arthur Lewis, inspired by this challenge, spent his early academic years examining the phenomenon of declining economic growth and underdevelopment in the colonies of the British West Indies. So in his industrialization of the British West Indies, Lewis attributed declining economic growth and standard of living to 1, the absence of industrial development, and 2, the colony's overdependence on a declining agrarian economy. He asserted that if agriculture is to give a higher standard of living, then industry must be developed. He noted that growth in the main sector, the agricultural sector, was below the rate of growth of the population, and hence the economic driver was inadequate to improve living conditions in the colonies, resulting in large-scale unemployment and impoverishment in the process. Summarizing the colony's status quo back then, Lewis notes that agriculture had become endemic. Again, connecting the dots, Lewis is connecting strong economic growth with that of economic prosperity, and I dare add, people's happiness. To address this economic challenge, Lewis argued in favor of an industrialization program to drive higher growth outcomes in the British West Indies. And many of us may not have known that Lewis's PhD was in industrial economics. No, mine. His focus was on industrialization. He returned to this issue later in his economic development with unlimited supply of labor model, where he argued that excess supply of labor, given the saturation in the traditional agriculture sector, could be optimally used to support the development of industrial sectors. From Lewis's perspective, a focus on industrialization of the colonies would have resulted in higher labor productivity, stronger economic growth, improved incomes for households, and as a result, improvement in standard of living, and again, I dare add, potentially, increased happiness overall. We getting the point. The effective implementation of the industrialization agenda would not happen again. Development and economic growth does not happen by accident. And so Lewis noted the importance of crafting strategic economic proposals to support the delivery of this economic goal. Hence, Lewis noted that in delivering an industrialization agenda for the British West Indies, there were in fact 3 policy instruments or ingredients to be considered: establishing markets, securing resources, and developing appropriate economic policy. So, essentially, we can expand these 3 ingredients to include unlocking the required funds for supporting industrialization, agreement on the types of goods to be manufactured categorizing industries based on levels of favorability determined by the expected productivity, identifying where best these goods were to be manufactured across the British West Indies, ensuring knowledge transfer so that locals can, over time, own and manage the industrialization agenda, establishing an appropriate and secured market for the final products. So if I were to address the market side, where I will seek to highlight the relevance of regional integration in that case. So for the markets, Lewis argued that the creation of a customs union among colonies to protect the final goods of the industrial sector was necessary, and was necessary also to ensure that there exists greater levels of intra-regional trade. So from as early as the 1950s, and maybe even before then, Lewis began appreciating the development utility of economic integration to the colonies of the British West Indies, and was in fact a major proponent of for the survival of the ill-fated West Indies Federation. So in the Caribbean, there has been approximately 5 decades of experiences of fostering regional economic integration. While the West Indies Federation, which would have been an exercise in political unionism, failed only 4 years after its establishment in 1958, efforts to implement economic integration in our region has been ongoing. Within CARICOM, the arrangement has expanded from a free trade arrangement through the Caribbean Free Trade Association, CARIFTA, to now a full single market arrangement through the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, CSME, as articulated under the revised Treaty of Chagarams. In the context of the OECS, a monetary union through the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union has been in existence for several decades, since 1983. And more recently, in 2010, the bold step taken by the revised Treaty of Bastia with the intention of enhancing the efficiency of the small states of the OECS, an economic union was established to address economic growth, development, and international competitiveness aspirations of the OECS. Efforts at industrialization is linked with our region's efforts at economic integration. Remember, I noted one of our growth constraints is small size, so we can't do it alone. Forging economic integration among small states is a strategic move given regards to their growth constraints. Again, limited critical mass because of small size and limited resources. In the 1960s, following Lewis's own contributions on industrialization, Havelock Brewster provided a general thesis on the idea of production integration. He highlighted production integration as an essential element of the economic integration agenda of the Caribbean region. Production integration would require the advancement of an industrialization program to assign the most optimum product mix among the participating countries of the Caribbean Free Trade Association, which later graduated into the Caribbean Community and Common Market. And I suspect many persons don't remember that CARICOM started as the Caribbean Community and Common Market, and then they decided to drop the Common Market, and it's now CARICOM, Caribbean Community. Without production integration, ladies and gentlemen, some have argued that the premise for intra-regional trade being delivered by economic integration will not be realized. What's the evidence in that regard? The evidence demonstrates that where the arrangements result in high production integration, intra-regional trade is high and contributes to faster economic growth outcomes. Evidence from the European Union and the Association of East Asian Nations, ASEAN, shows that regional integration has led to significant intra-regional trade, in many cases above 40% of all trade. On the contrary, an examination of CARICOM's trade data reveals that intra-regional trade only accounts for about 10%. The overall outcome, however, for the smaller member states of CARICOM, OECS and Belize, have been a growing trade deficit due to the imbalance in inter-regional trade. The data for the OECS, while a little more encouraging, still reveals low intra-OECS trade levels. These outcomes are largely the result of lack of merchandise to trade with each other, and hence an outcome of limited industrialization achievements. The point here is that while intra-regional trade remains low, industrialization cannot be achieved without the presence of a sizable market to sell the final products. I've also argued elsewhere that notwithstanding the limited successes in trade, regional economic integration remains a cornerstone of our efforts towards economic growth and development in the Caribbean. Brewster wrote, "The case for economic integration of the West Indies rests less on the enlargement of the market which it makes possible than on the opportunity which it will provide for more efficient use of resources." And we have seen this both within CARICOM and especially at the OECS. So think about it. The benefits that both CARICOM and the OECS have delivered: functional cooperation in a plethora of areas, education, CXC, disaster management, CDMA, in the case of CARICOM, pool procurement of medicines, PPS, one court, the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, one bank, and monetary authority, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, in the case of the OECS. Without these, each independent Caribbean state would have had to acquire significant resources to attempt to deliver these on their own. Imagine 15 countries with 15 central banks. And actually, the data has shown the countries with monetary independence, meaning that they have their own central bank, have generally done worse in terms of the stability of the currency and in terms of managing inflation, when you compare that with the performance of the Eastern Caribbean dollar. So that's significant to note. So the point here is that these institutions have had tremendous positive outcomes, from delivering universally accepted certifications and disaster management coordination to reducing drug costs and providing for a strong currency and judicial integrity. Benefits that many developing states continue to struggle to deliver to their own citizens. Hence, functional cooperation within the framework of CARICOM and the OECS remains our best practice to share with other developing regions. There is, however, the need for renewed interest in regional economic integration as a channel through which economic growth and sustainable development and happiness can be delivered, as we seek to accelerate the implementation of these integration frameworks. We all know about industrialization by invitation. Now, here's the secret. In all of the readings I've done of Lewis, I still can't find industrialization by invitation. Yeah? Nonetheless, it has been credited to Lewis. And in fact, is associated with Lewis's acknowledgement that the colony's status quo was defined also by limited savings, given declining incomes and low savings rate. Consequently, there was the need to attract foreign investors from developed regions with the necessary capital to finance the industrialization program through the offering of a good mix of government policy initiatives. In this regard, Lewis wrote, "Successful industrialization demand self-confidence, drive, initiative, and soundly conceived policies." Oh, here it is. Been looking for it. While the development of light goods manufacturing with the establishment of free trade zones in several Caribbean seas were notable efforts in the 1980s and 1990s, Caribbean seas really are no more industrialized today. No more industrialized today when you compare the reality of the colonial era. The question remains, is the advancement of an industrialization agenda still good policy for seeds? And I believe some lessons are instructive. Drawing on data from the top 10 happiest countries and the fast-growing seeds such as Singapore, there are several worthy observations. And I seek here to highlight briefly some significant observations which are outcomes of successful industrialization program or have supported the same, including significant contribution to manufacturing sector as a share of GDP, higher levels of economic diversification, higher levels of export, strong net inflows, foreign direct investment, international competitiveness, high levels of labor productivity, high levels of tertiary education, and higher per capita income growth are all lessons from countries that have achieved high levels of industrialization. So if I take a few of these, significant levels of manufacturing share of GDP. So an examination of the manufacturing output as a share of GDP highlights that the top 10 happiest countries and the 10 least happy countries actually have manufacturing sector that contributes to 14% of GDP in both cases, on average, using the last 50 years. However, some of the growth lagging economies within the low happiness score, such as Sierra Leone, have manufacturing share which is less than 5% of GDP. Now, in the case of the Caribbean seeds, so again, in this particular figure, we are moving from right to left. And what is observed is that Singapore, which is the very one at the top, in 2023 had manufacturing share of that of GDP of 17%. OECD seeds, for instance, were about 3%. I think I have a better graph which details this best. I'm hoping you can see. And so generally, manufacturing as a share of GDP for the world, 16%. For the highest countries that have high happiness scores, 13.9%. Similarly, low happiness scores, countries in that range. And Singapore, 17%. OECD seeds about 3% on average. Primarily because many of our economies are really service-based, tourism-driven economies. If we examine significant levels of merchandise trade, it is noted that countries with high happiness index score have an average export value as a share of GDP of 46.54%, compared with 27.65% for countries with low happiness index scores. Singapore, again, is a significant outlier in the data, with 180.57% of GDP. Moreover, generally, seeds' share of global merchandise trade has declined significantly from 0.61% in 1980 to 0.14% in the pre-COVID era. reflecting the result of a withdrawal of the accommodation that they once received to export their products to the global north on one hand, and the limited impact and successes at delivering competitive industrial sectors on the other hand. What about labor productivity? So labor productivity refers to the output per hour produced by a given worker. And so you can assume here that if given same conditions, an individual produces 10 units of a good in an hour today, and tomorrow, same conditions, he's able to produce 15 units of that good within an hour. One can argue that his labor productivity has increased. The reverse is true, of course. If he started with 15 and then the next day is 10, then labor productivity has declined. Why is labor productivity important? It is noted here, achieving high levels of productivity is essentially important because more productive economies tend to expand their economic growth capacity faster than less productive ones. Hence, Lewis's preoccupation with declining productivity in the agriculture sector in the 1950s and beyond. And this is an issue that have concerned policymakers and is a fundamental constraint to private sector growth and development, mind you. Among the countries with high happiness scores, labor productivity averaged 75.2 output per hour over the last 10 years, while among countries with low happiness scores, labor productivity averaged 10.37 output per hour. It is noted as well that the faster growing economies among this group have higher productivity levels compared with those with lower growth. Let's take Botswana, for instance, with an average productivity level of 21.85 output, almost twice the average of that group. And Sierra Leone, on the other hand, with an average output per hour of 2.42. Within the CARICOM region, for the same period, average labor productivity level represented 11 output per hour. This is concerning. However, several CARICOM member states are more productive, including the Bahamas, 42.48, Guyana, 25.12, now don't mind that. The last 5 years, Guyana's productivity levels represented 84.39%. So Guyana is catching up. But we all know why. St. Lucia, 23.12, so it's twice the average, CARICOM. Barbados, 17.68, for instance. But then you also have Jamaica and Haiti performing below CARICOM average at 9.22 output per hour and 4.19 output per hour, respectively. In the Pacific region, some states, such as Papua New Guinea, experiences low productivity levels as well, at 6.3 output per hour per worker. And it's also noteworthy, again, I've made reference to Singapore continuously, that Singapore, not sure if you can see it here, sad I don't have a pointer. No, previous graph. I'm looking for Singapore. But nonetheless, Singapore has one of the highest labor productivity rates among countries with high happiness scores and among states at 86 output per worker per hour. In terms of tertiary education, in an environment where artificial intelligence and machine learning are becoming the mantra of modern society, achieving high human capital is essentially important to generate growth and sustainable economic development. Training a population for the jobs of tomorrow requires high levels of investment in tertiary education. Lewis appreciated the value added that knowledge transfer brought to the growth and development discourse, and highlighted its importance to the sustainability and overall levels of industrialization. In other words, high levels of tertiary education was critically important for successful industrialization. Examining the 10 happiest countries, it is noted that tertiary level education represented 46.7% of the population, compared with 7% of the population for the 10 least happy countries over the last 50 years. For Caribbean seeds, this figure stood at around 11.58%. While Caribbean governments spent significantly on education, public education in general, outcomes in tertiary education are far from acceptable levels. Singapore had an average of 90.9% of its population with tertiary education for the same period. Lastly, high per capita income. Everything about the ability to consume, the ability to, the enlargement of your capabilities, as Amata said in reference to, is about having the resources that would be required so that you have choices. And your per capita income gives a general sense of that income that an average person in a country will have to spend for the year. Because essentially it's your GDP divided by your population. So we know there could be outliers nonetheless. However, it is very instructive. So it's another noteworthy observation. Countries with high happiness index tend also to be high income countries based on per capita income levels. And let's take Singapore again, for instance, who in the 1930s with no industrial base was considerably poor, with a per capita income of US $3,460, comparable with several of the least happy countries in the world today. In fact, in many cases, actually even above at that rate, many of these countries. But with significant and strategic focus on achieving strong economic growth and development, Singapore undergone an industrial revolution, which today has contributed to an impressive growth in per capita income, leading to an income per head of US $65,422, and I would put the cents, 46 cents, in 2023. Let us contrast this reality with the least 10 happy countries. There has been limited attainment of any form of industrial development, and in many cases, these economies have found it difficult to transition away from significant dependence on primary production and to become more diversified in their economy with industrial sectors. In these economies, per capita incomes range from US $440 in Malawi to US $4,538, and I'll put the cents and 72 cents in Botswana. Now, Botswana is an interesting case because while this is really an average of several decades, the last 10 years, Botswana's per capita income growth has declined. And so if I were to make reference to the last 10 years, that would be about 2,000 and something. Yeah. It's about half of the average that I'm reporting for Botswana. So having said all of this, and I hope that the whole notion that economic growth is needed to bring about happiness, I wish to conclude. And I say here, the evidence presented in this lecture really highlights the value of an effective industrialization program to achieving strong economic growth and higher standard of living. Achieving these outcomes are fundamentally important to delivering higher levels of happiness among populations. However, drawing on data from the top 10 happiest countries and seeds with high happiness index scores and the 10 least happy countries several areas of policy concern have been highlighted for closer examination among policymakers with the aim of accelerating economic growth and development among Caribbean states. I also believe, just to put a personal note here, as part of this agenda for achieving stronger economic growth, promoting a culture among citizens where self and communal contribution to development is our raison d'etre is also essential. An unending commitment to hard work and an unwavering effort to surpassing the accomplishments of generations before us are also essential to unlocking what is needed to complete Lewis's vision of a Caribbean society and economy with high human happiness. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henry, for that insightful, rich, and well-researched presentation. It was truly a pleasure listening to it to find out what exactly you discovered when you actually looked into it. Right now, we want to open the floor to the audience. Yes? Yes. We want to open the floor to the audience for discussion. And I hope everyone was listening attentively because we have 5 prizes up for grabs. I hope you all were listening. 5 vouchers for lunch at the Le Fort restaurant at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Now, guys, I know you all are so excited. I know. And I just want to remind you guys that the food, honestly, I remember it, and it was delicious. So please feel free to ask and answer all of your questions. But before we start the general discussion, I would like to ask a few questions of mine, because I know everybody was paying attention. You know, that presentation was not a boring one. That presentation was actually fun. So, my first question, is everybody ready? Okay, so my first question. In what year was Sir Arthur Lewis awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics? Now, no, okay. So, guys, we're going back to the classroom. If you believe, do not say your answer, somebody might hear it, okay? So if you believe you have the correct answer, please step up to the mic bravely and give your answer, and you have a chance to win that voucher.
Greetings, sister.
Hi.
Yes, that year was 1979.
Perfect. Give him a hand of applause, a round of applause.
However, he cannot receive the prize because he travels to the UK next week. So he does not qualify.
Does that mean I can gift it to who I choose?
I think he does deserve to gift it to who he chooses. I think so. You know, you deserved it. You were also the first. No, you deserve it. Okay, can you please come up to claim your prize? Thank you very much. Good job. Okay, up next. Now, I hope, again, we were listening to the presentation. Dr. Henry did mention what field of economics Sir Arthur Lewis completed his PhD in. In fact, he kept mentioning it over and over again, so much so that I was like, I have to write this down. So, is there a brave soul? I see Orlando smiling and waving his hand. Is he stepping up to
Development
the mic?
economics.
You would like to answer? What? Wait, what was it? Sorry.
Development economics.
Development economics. Now you are close, but I cannot give it to you. But however, he was a pioneer. Let us give her half a point. He was a pioneer for development economics, and Dr. Henry did mention that off and on. However, I'm looking for the exact field of economics he completed his PhD in.
Industrial economics.
Yes. Woo! Congratulations, Orlando. So Orlando will also be dining at La
I don't know if I should disqualify him again because that is the brother of the one who just won the prize.
Oh my! You're an intelligent family.
I'll gift it, yeah? I'll gift it.
An intelligent family. Thank you, Orlando. Very good, very good. I don't know if it was teamwork, but look at that. You see what integration can do? You see they're collaborating, so I have no problem with that. Now, number 3. What country is significantly ahead of the other wait, y'all. Okay, I already see people rushing. Wow, you see, okay, good, you're answering. Now let me finish. Next, some of us always think we know the answer, but you haven't heard my question fully yet. What country is significantly ahead of the other countries in terms of economic growth and per capita income among small island developing states, according to the
That would be Singapore.
That is correct. Thank you very much. We are also rewarding bravery here as well because let me tell you, I know some persons in this room and I know they know all of the answers, but they're not, I guess maybe they're giving you all a chance. They ate at La Forte already and they really want you guys to enjoy it. So I'm going to say it's that. All right. And I'm going to reserve my last one, but for 4. My last question. This is your last chance, unless if you want to pay full price. What correlation was observed between labor productivity and the happiness of citizens in small island developing states? Was it positive or negative?
It's a 50-50, so I'll go with positive and pray.
Oh, yes, actually, prayer is good, and you are correct.
Okay.
It was positive, that's for sure, and yes, it was shown in the data, because, thank you so much.
I love free food.
Enjoy, me too. Enjoy. So yes, so it was indeed positive, and the reason I wrote this question down, it's like, when he mentioned that, everybody was like, oh, you know, it was like this sign of relief because, to be honest, in our society today, you would think like, oh, labor productivity, you know, if that's high, then the people can't be happy. But look at that. Labor productivity was high. That shows what purpose does. When you have a purpose, you have a reason, you can derive your happiness from that as well. So it really did speak volumes. And I know everybody was like, wow, you know? So definitely positive correlation, and I was so happy to hear that. Once again, honestly, this lecture was exciting. Thank you. Can we give Dr. Henry another round of applause, please? Thank you so much. And again, just remember that I am reserving my last voucher. So I'm not going to say who exactly, you know, has what exactly it is, but you guys will find out shortly. I am now going to open the floor to any questions, any discussion questions that you guys may have. Please go to the mic. Pardon? Yes, I know, but she, even before I was asking the question, she already had her hand up. And guys, I'm not sure if somebody told her about it, but the first person to speak is the winner of the voucher. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. I will give you a voucher at the end. Okay, so yes, what is your question?
I have more than one. They rolled into a statement and then a question.
Okay, I will have Dr. Henry.
Thank you so much for encouraging me to stand up. I come to these things all the time. I never ask a question. But when I was growing up, listening to my mother's small transistor radio in our very small house, there was a man on the radio named Willie James. I'm aging myself, but that's fine. And Willie James had this phrase, "This is St. Lucia, where we are happy." And I grew up knowing that I was a happy St. Lucian, even without the resources that could have made my house a little bigger and more efficient. And so my main challenge tonight is the equating of happiness with standard of living and prosperity, both for the collective and for the individual. So I would like you to address that. But I want you to also speak to the issue of inequality to access, and also the structure of the world that keeps countries that are primary producers as primary producers and not manufacturers. Because if you have to look at the country's resources, like those in Africa, why have they not developed manufacturing? It is because of the configuration of the world, that certain countries will exploit resources for the happiness of their citizens, which is why these developed countries can have happier citizens than us. And not because of any other factor, but because of the structure of the world. That we are in this position because they exploit us for their own happiness. I want you to speak to that inequality that keeps us depressed. The opposite of happiness. And I also want you to speak to the issue. I also want to say that the issue of labor productivity is a farce. For centuries, my ancestors slaved in these countries and did not get any benefits. So don't tell me it's because we were not productive. So labor productivity for me is in many ways a farce. And I can guarantee you tonight that the richest man in the world, we all know who that is not the happiest. He's not the happiest. Furthermore, I would like to meet you next month in Trinidad at Carnival to show you real happiness. Thank you.
Ambassador, you've given me quite enough. Is this working? Yeah. Let me attempt to answer these questions. I think to begin with, you've had generational changes over the decades, and circumstances have changed for communities. So what may have defined happiness then, the conditions for those realities have changed. I think the point that I attempted to make in this lecture is that ultimately happiness requires resources. Financial resources, it could be communal resources. Ambassador? Yes. It could be communal resources, but ultimately it would require resources, because resources will define the capabilities that a household would have, and consequently how that household is able to maneuver circumstances and situations that may impact its happiness, right? So a typical example, if healthcare is important to an individual, the very fact that that person has resources to sustain good health would contribute somewhat to that person's happiness. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that person need to have the resources themselves. It could be through the access to good healthcare. You just need to walk in and maybe you've already paid your taxes for it. Somebody else is contributing to it, right? So ultimately, while there can be several different perspectives on happiness, we cannot run from the fact that if you remove access to resources from individuals and households, it will impact these individual circumstances. And ultimately, it might make persons less happy, right? Now, as an undergrad, many years ago, I remember, particularly, and interestingly, and maybe that's something for persons doing economics to appreciate. If you're doing economics, don't just do economics. Do another social science with it. Because I did government with my economics degree. Graduated with a double major. But in the government degrees where I really appreciated the international community situation. And I read a paper, I've never forgotten that, the Kicking Down the Ladder of Development, where it is customary for developed countries to remove the conditions that helped and allowed them to develop, to deny, if I should put it this way, developing countries those same conditions. And I think we can see it even in the whole concept of trade liberalization. The conditions that would have facilitated high levels of trade for developed countries don't exist for developing countries, right? So that is something that needs to be addressed. But again, maybe that's another argument for strengthening regional integration. Because if we can't get the conditions we want in the international community, maybe if we strengthen, that we're able to address some of those issues as a collective. And we've had good examples, and I tried to identify some of those in the lecture as well. And then the last one, I might have missed that one. Made 2 points. That was the carnival. No, I don't mind coming to carnival. I think carnival is a good thing. But happiness is ultimately, very multifaceted, and it will depend on the individual. But take resources away from that person who claims to be happy, and we'll see how happy that person will be afterwards. So I hope I answered your question.
Your question?
Greetings, everybody.
Greeting.
Please excuse my animation. I'm very passionate about conversations around economics, so I can be a bit, flamboyant with my vibrations.
Totally understand.
Yes. One thing I just wanted to quickly touch on, through grace and mercy, is when we opened up the presentation, we began with a prayer. Yes? So, and a lot of people I heard say amen and X, Y, Z. So I wanted to draw the attention to a book within the Bible called Proverbs. I am a fan of this book. It says in chapter 3, verse 13, happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. This is where happiness can be found. So for those who are seeking to be happy, it's through wisdom, and that's the Most High's wisdom, and also in understanding. So that's just to address that side of the things I wanted to address. Another sound. The question for the presentation was, what are the prescriptions, and I've underlined that part, for growth and development for SIDs and etc., etc. Prescriptions, something just popped into my mind when I was reading that, and we tend to use the word prescription when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, yeah? So it's to do with drugs, yeah? Okay. A lot of the drugs that are issued by pharmaceutical companies on prescription, they tend to only deal with the symptoms. They don't necessarily deal with the actual cause of the symptoms. So I'm not too sure with the reason for using the word prescription, but through grace and mercy, I hope that the development and the approach that we are taking is going to deal with the root cause and not just the symptoms. That's all I wanted to share. Rastafari.
Thank you very much. But if Stanza would allow me, if I respond very quickly, for each of these observations that I made reference to, whether it be high productivity or whether it be high levels of manufacturing as a share of GDP or percentage of GDP, you would need to consider how to achieve these, right? So how do we increase labor productivity? Why is labor unproductive? And what are the factors that can help improve labor productivity? That's important. I place the conversation on labor productivity very closely with, if you saw the order in which I presented it, with that of higher tertiary level education. Because again, they're connected as well. So proper training, cultural, ensuring that persons have the sort of cultural appreciation for work, and the contribution that they make into their community and their society. So definitely, each of these, and certainly time would not have permitted me to delve into each of these issues, but of course, you would need to do so to understand how do you bring about, higher tertiary level, higher manufacturing output, higher merchandise output, etc., right? And this is linked with what the ambassador asked earlier as well. Thank you.
Yes. I was actually going to announce that we will be taking one more question because of time, but since we have two persons who really want to ask their question, we will be taking our final two questions. Feel free, however, afterward to converse with Dr. Henry as long as you want with your questions. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. Very good presentation, I must say. And two things stood out for me in this presentation. And you spoke about when you did your undergrad, and I'm sure that you remember that when we took statistics class, we spoke about correlation and is not causation. And it appears to me that based on the various economic indicators that you presented, obviously that there was a strong correlation between these economic indicators and happiness. However, you didn't conclude that there was it causes happiness. That's very, very important. Okay, correlation is not causation. And there's a very pertinent statement that you put up there, and you said that growth leads to economic development. I would want to kind of modify that statement to say it can lead to economic development. Because as you mentioned, you define what GDP is, and the measure of growth, of course, is what we use GDP as a measure of growth, and is the total market value of all goods and services produced in the country. You can produce a lot of output, but it could be at the detriment of the environment, which will cause negative happiness. So the objective, I agree with you, should be happiness, but not just growth. the growth needs to come with some good policies that will ensure that the population gets the happiness out of the growth. Because you can have, and I think the ambassador had a very good point, and I think I made that statement some time ago in an article. We need to be able to measure inequality. Because you can have massive growth in a country, and that growth could be going into just to a minority. Again, good economic policy will ensure that you'll have equitable distribution of that growth. And someone just whispered there, Singapore might not have that. It does. Oh, it has? Okay, it does that. So that, again, it has to come with very good strategic economic policy and not just growth. I must add just one more point here. Talking about good policy, I'm hoping that the government of St. Lucia re-implement the what they call it again, the units that used to, I forget the name of it, but there was a unit that was responsible for policy for the government or for the country. The Economic and Planning Unit, that is, Economic and Planning Unit. And this is supposed to be the think tank for the country. We have an economic unit, but I think it's more research and it's not policy driven per se. Okay, so these are the importance of governance, where we are not just focusing on outputs, but how well these outputs are actually contributing to the overall well-being of the country and the people. Thank you.
Thank you for the question and the statement, really. I think there is agreement here, Dr. Ribolas. There's agreement in that regard. So in the lecture, I would have highlighted the importance of good policy. So good economic starts with good policy. So that's fundamental. But it's also important to note, and then I suppose there isn't any data that shows that the development we seek comes about without growth. There's absolutely no data that shows that. You have to grow. And a good policy would ensure that growth is, well, people say equitably shared, but you may not see that happen. But I think what the high income, the high happiness, countries with high happiness scores, what they do have is the ability to share the wealth better, so that there isn't any level of deprivation, especially on social policy matters, right? So I have 2 children, and as an adult, I'm thinking, where am I getting the funds to send them to university? Yeah, well, scholarship, right. But the point, though, is that if we're able to allocate our funds, the money is generated, income generated of a particular country, in such a way where there's strategic policy driving higher education that allows for all. You're a bright child, whether you're from a poor household or a wealthy household or middle income household, the access is there for you too. That is what we talk about good policy, right? But thanks very much.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Springer.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I have a question, but I'll say a few things. 3 things, really. On the point about equality or inequality, I think for me, that's a big issue. And I think that's the distinguishing factor between the perceptions of happiness that we had, that Dr. Suma was speaking about when we were growing up. My perception is that we were happier people then, because there was less inequality. the majority of our families were poor, so we didn't aspire, right, for wealth and all of the negative energy that comes with that, right? Now we are seeing there's a starkness, right, to where we want to go, where the majority of us want to reach, and so we're making ourselves unhappy trying to get there. That's an observation that I made. The second one is I'm making a point to myself. I tend to do that sometimes, make points to myself. I reckon if you go to Bordelais Correctional Facility now, you are unlikely to find more than 1% of the population there who are musicians. Right? If that many. Right? And the point I'm trying to make there is something of an intrinsic benefit to people doing things that they love. Right? And when you do the things you love, you're less unhappy. Right? And I have argued based on that observation that our education system needs to be more talent-based. Okay? Let us zoom in on the natural makeup of people and where their sweet spot, so to speak, where they feel more at ease, more happy. And I think you will find that despite the points you make about economic growth and connection, and I take that point, but I would prefer to see us use these non-traditional determinants of happiness as a means of achieving economic growth, rather than coming at economic growth from the more traditional standpoint and hoping that happiness will accrue at the end of it. Thanks.
Yes, now this is our absolute final question. I've gotten clear. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Henry, for a really interesting, thought-provoking presentation, and of course, to South Louis Community College. Following up on the point from Dr. Raymond about causation, this morning I discovered that the individuals that travel the most in the world, take the most trips, are the Finnish people, right? And they happen to be, it's interesting enough, again, causation, maybe, I don't know, of course, correlation, but they happen to also be the top of the list of people who are supposed to be happy. Now, does that come from taking trips? I don't know. Does that come from having the resources to be able to travel that much? Although most of the travel that they do is, in fact, internal to their country, but that's on another note. Another very interesting, I had a very quick look at that happiness index. And I think Singapore is like 37, and Trinidad is no, Singapore is 34, and Trinidad happens to be like 36. So maybe you're onto something about the carnival, because clearly Trinidad is nowhere near there yet in terms, yes, they're one of the richest in the Caribbean, but they're clearly not there in terms of Singapore levels of development and what have you. But if you look at, and maybe this is coming back to the issue of the causation aspects of it, what is that? Those happiness indices are measuring a number of metrics. One of them happens to be GDP. And in fact, I think they even give you the weighting as to how much the GDP is actually impacting on the happiness. But there are a lot of other factors which I think we need to pay a lot of attention to. Things like the extent of social support. So when you look at that list, most of the countries on the top are the Nordic, Scandinavian, social democratic countries that have lots and lots of support for their citizens, whether it's healthcare and education, all of that. So I think that is a really important aspect that we need to look at. And another one, interesting enough, is the perception of corruption, right? And so I think we need to think about some of these things. And then I also want to point out that I don't think, well, the list that I saw didn't even have St. Lucia on the list. I don't know. So maybe we're not even there yet. But the point I think is important is that we need, in fact, to start polling our society a lot more to find out what makes them happy. Are they happy? Are they, what changes, what would how do they see themselves? Coming back to Dr. Suma's point, she always thought that she was happy. So I think it's important to maybe, as maybe a pilot through the South Louis Community College, maybe take on a survey like that in the case of St. Lucia to study ourselves a little bit more. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Calix, for this.
Just an observation. You mentioned about some regional organizations like the Central Bank, like the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. I think what is missing in the OECS is a regional competition authority or Fair Trading Commission to regulate business mergers and acquisitions, because if the business continue to become monopolies, consumers will become unhappy. Okay?
Yeah, that's very true.
The other thing is I have a pet peeve. I think by now we keep having the Nobel laureate presentations every year or discussions, and I'm not sure as yet if we have a wall of, if we have walls of fame at our airports that actually show the pictures of our Nobel laureates. Okay, yeah.
Wonderful recommendation.
Yeah. May I ask you one, Mistress of Ceremony?
Yes.
Quick point. Yes. No, certainly the OECS Commission is quite aware of the value of competition policy. And this is part of what we are working towards in supporting member states to deliver strong institutional frameworks and legal frameworks to deal with those matters. And just to respond quickly to Calix's point, I think ultimately we need to appreciate that while growth on its own may not impact the happiness, but if the government is expected to broaden social programs and services, they would need to have resources to do so. And they would find it very, very difficult to get those resources if the economy is not growing. So that's the fundamental point. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You guys have really been an engaging audience. Thank you so much. A round of applause to you. And again, another round of applause to Dr. Henry for his presentation. It was truly thought-provoking. And now, up next on the agenda, we have the presentation of tokens of appreciation done by Dr. Winston Philogence, the Vice Principal Academics at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. Please give him a warm welcome.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It falls to me to hand over tokens of appreciation. And I promise I will not be here long because I was instructed that all I have to say is what's written on here. Presented to Dr. Clarence Henry, keynote speaker, in recognition of your stellar contribution to the South Louis Memorial Lecture 2025.
This gentleman wants our attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philogence. And just moving along quickly, I now invite Miss Nisha Bernard, student of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, to give the vote of thanks. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all those who have joined us virtually for this evening's lecture. On behalf of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, I would like to thank everyone who worked to help actualize the Sir Arthur Lewis Memorial Lecture. Thank you to Mr. Jefferson Gabriel, who delivered a beautiful rendition of our national anthem. Special thanks to our chair and moderator, Ms. Stanza Deligny, who guided us through the discussions with grace and clarity. We are also grateful to Dr. Clarence Henry for his insightful and thought-provoking lecture on economic prosperity in the new age. What are the prescriptions for growth and development for small island developing states? Small global lessons. Your knowledge and expertise on the topic were invaluable, and we are sure that your words will inspire positive change in the way we approach economic development in small island nations. Thank you to the Bank of St. Lucia for their generous sponsorship of this event. Your continued support of education and community development is truly appreciated. Bank of St. Lucia, all the bank you need. We would also like to acknowledge the Nobel Laureate Committee for continuing to honor the legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis. Our gratitude extends to the Board of Governors, principal, staff, and students of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, whose dedication and hard work have made this event possible. You are the backbone of this institution, and we are grateful for your commitment. Thank you to GIS for live streaming the event and making it accessible to a wider audience, ensuring that more people can benefit from the knowledge shared today. And thank you to AudioWorks for providing seamless sound support. Thank you both. Finally, we would like to thank our audience for your active participation and continued support of this event, as this lecture is designed to educate the public both here and beyond the shores of St. Lucia. We look forward to continuing the legacy of Sir Arthur Lewis, embracing the wisdom shared today, and applying these lessons to further our growth as a nation. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
A big thank you to everyone for your attendance and participation. Please make a special effort to attend the other Nobel Laureate Festival 2025 activities. You guys had a good time here, so I'm sure that you will have a good time again. So please come. And feel free to join us for light refreshments and some sweet still pan and the remaining activities which commemorate the festival, of course. Please stand, everyone, for the departure of the Governor General of St. Lucia, His Excellency Sir Cyril Errol Charles. I thank you.
Budget. Within the financial resources, we are doing what we can. And back to the health and security levy, the figures tell me health and security levy at the end of this fiscal year may raise between $37 and $38 million.